So I first would like to welcome everyone to the KPAA. This little program came out of a roundtable discussion we had with Congressman Welch, and during the discussion, it turns out that a lot of people are noticing more bike traffic in the area. It's a growing segment of the people coming here in the summer, and we know some of our businesses have reached out to us and said, I don't know the first thing about biking, and turns out there's a lot of simple ways to be friendly and sort of engage those visitors, from putting out a bike rack to knowing some basic lingo and being able to answer some frequently asked questions. So that's why we put this together. So today we have two of our awesome partners. We have Randy from First Stop Board Barn, and then we have Tony from Alpine Bike Works. So they're gonna, they split up their conversation today about frequently asked questions and some basic vocabulary. So we're really, really thankful to have them. And then next Tuesday is the next program, which will be about the regional trail system. And so you can, spread the word to anyone else who might be really interested in that as well. So thanks guys for being here, and you can go ahead and get started.
Good. We're going to discuss sort of what some of the nomenclature and terms are, so you can identify them in terms of different types of mountain biking. The two that are probably the most popular, specific to our region, would be downhill mountain biking and trail riding. Some people might refer to it as cross-country riding, but it refers to riding on single-track mountain bike trails. So they're trails that are either specifically designed for mountain biking or trails that have sort of evolved into mountain bike trails from animal trails or hiking trails, or some trails that have sort of had another purpose at one time or another. Single track is the most popular. You can ride that anywhere that you can put a trail network or trail system in, and there are quite a few in our region here. I would say within a 10-mile radius, we probably have 7 or 8 different trail networks, and they're being expanded and developed all the time. So when one would ask, where could I ride, or where should I ride, or where the good riding is, you probably want to ask a question identifying what type of riding they want to do. If it is cross-country riding or single-track riding, or we may say pedaling, right, that would you would probably refer them to one of the local trail networks that would be specific to that. For example, the Sherburne Trails, Green Mountain Trails, there's the Aqueduct Trails in Woodstock, Pine Hill Park in Rutland are some examples. The other type of riding that would be really popular is downhill riding that currently requires lift access. So Killington Resort has made a huge investment over the last few years in downhill mountain bike trails. There are trails that are specifically designed for this type of riding. You will take a bike that's designed for that purpose. It's a bigger bike, lots of travel, slack head angles, more comfortable for descending. Really not a bike that you would pedal. And then you would ride that bike. You'd buy a lift pass, take the lift up, and descend on the trails, and that in particular that are at Killington Resort. There's another type of riding that's become really popular around here. It's called gravel riding also. It's not specifically mountain biking, but it's riding on dirt roads, gravel roads, class 4 roads, and Vermont pave. So that's really been popular, and that might be a little bit more difficult to identify. Someone may come in and you may not know where to send them. And quite frankly, I think that we all need to sort of work on identifying networks where people can ride gravel bikes specifically. So those are the 3 most popular types of riding that you're going to experience, and probably have to direct people to, answer questions about, and things of that nature. So I would say that identifies it. Good. Randy?
Cool. So I'm Randy Ellis from First Stop in the Board Barn. If you don't know where your local bike shops are, you should, honestly, there's Tony at Alpine Bike Works. They're right up the road by the Killington Deli, or, towards the deli. Actually, sorry, right across the street now.
We moved.
Yeah, we moved. Used to be next to the deli, right across the street now from the chamber. So obviously Tony's a great resource at Alpine Bike Works, and his staff is awesome too. Our shop is located, if you were to make a left out of this driveway, go about 6 miles, 1 mile past the Skyship gondola at the junction of Route 4 and 100. It's called First Stop in the Board Barn. We've been in business. My mom and dad started in 1979, so we have a wealth of knowledge too. And then there's also going to be another shop up on the mountain at Basin, True Wheels. They have a great team there. And then obviously the resort has a bike shop as well. So a lot of times when people come in or I get phone calls, they're calling specifically for these types of questions. So don't be afraid if you're not sure how to refer someone to go on a gravel ride or to go on a mountain bike cross-country ride or anything like that. The bike shops are going to have probably the most information, and that's probably your best way to forward that. Obviously, if you know more, it makes it easier for you up front. But don't be afraid to send people, give a phone number. I've brought cards today, so feel free if you want to grab one of those. We're definitely a good resource about that. I also wanted to point out, so Tony mentioned there's mountain biking, which is taking off in this region across the state, really. It's growing fast, and a lot of people ask about that. And like he said, there's the downhill riding as well as what we would consider cross-country or trail biking. The most common question I get on the phone when people call, if they've never gone mountain biking, I ask them that, have you ever gone mountain biking before? If so, were you riding up and down? That's what we consider cross-country trail mountain biking. Or did you take a lift, go to the top of the mountain, and then ride the bike down? A lot of people who are new and they want to try it, they've seen ads, are really nervous and sometimes embarrassed because there is so much lingo in mountain biking and it can be a little intimidating. I think a lot of people come to Killington specifically to go skiing and snowboarding, and there's sometimes confusion too. I get a lot of people who ask, so do you just ride down the ski trails? And this, again, these are new people, but it's good to let them know, oh no, there's trails that are specifically designed and built for mountain biking. There's more beginner-friendly and family-friendly options at the snowshed area. Sometimes people think of snowshed just as the one trail they use in the winter, but let them know there's multiple trails off of snowshed. There's additional trails at Ram's Head. Those are going to be intermediate with a mix of advanced and even expert. And then from the very top of the resort, I think in the past, a lot of people who may have tried mountain biking 5 or 10 years ago at Killington may have gotten intimidated because they would take the gondola up to the top and the view is beautiful, but the ride from the top is a little bit more technical and challenging. And I think over the years, a lot of people they're intimidated because they did it once and they didn't have a great experience. But to reassure them, like, hey, if you're new to the sport, definitely go to snowshed. I always tell people it's not a bad idea if you're not mountain biking a lot to get a lesson, just like skiing. You wouldn't send your best friend out on the hill without some pointers. And mountain biking should be the same thing. A lot of people will also ask us about, what they should wear. And this is an important one. I think a lot of people think of cross-country mountain biking and trail mountain biking, which they've maybe done kind of in the area they live. A lot of times people for that will use a lightweight helmet with venting so they stay cool. They might have a pair of bike gloves, short finger or full finger, and maybe sneakers, or they might have cycling shoes and a cycling short. When they're going up to the mountain, I do recommend that people either rent or purchase, if they don't have their own, full finger gloves to protect their hands, and elbow pads and knee pads. In addition to, if they're more cautious, I almost recommend everyone rent or buy a full face helmet for additional protection. A lot of times once you have that gear on, people feel a little more comfortable because their biggest fear about mountain biking is actually falling, which if you have the padding on is much less likely to have cuts and scrapes that you can prevent that. All the shops sell a lot of this gear. We rent some of that gear, and then the mountain also does too. So that's a good thing to know about and let them know about. Next one I often get is about, can I use my own mountain bike? And I ask them, I typically ask them, if you're going to the resort, they're doing downhill riding, I ask them, do you have a downhill or enduro mountain bike? Which a lot of people, if they don't know, they probably don't have one. So that's where you might want to suggest they rent a bike for the day. If they do have it, then let them know that's going to be the ideal bike for that type of riding. If they're going to a cross-country or a trail network near us, so Sherburne Trails, which is about a mile and a half down the road on the right, just past Kent Pond, a front suspension mountain bike or a cross-country or trail mountain full suspension mountain bike is going to be ideal, a bike that's good for going up and down. If someone says it's a really old mountain bike, I let them know like the technology has come a long way. To make the most of your experience, it's really worth it to go to one of the local shops and actually rent a bike, a modern bike that's designed for it. The wheels have gotten bigger, the geometry is better, and the suspension can make it much more enjoyable for all ages, whether it's younger kids or much older adults. So those are a couple things about bikes. It's definitely important to ask them that question. And then I always have people ask if it's going to be safe. And I always tell them, like any sport, there's a lot of risk involved, but that shouldn't intimidate them from trying it. If they're nervous, definitely take the lesson and rent the gear, the padding and everything. And if they're not sure, like a lot of times we'll tell people there's also alternatives to mountain biking if they're intimidated by mountain biking. Like Tony said, there's a lot of beautiful dirt roads in Vermont that you can go biking on. You don't necessarily need to have a big fancy downhill mountain bike. You can use a, more of a comfort or fitness bike. And I know our shop and most of the other shops in town will have those available for rental. They're generally a little bit less expensive too. So sometimes if people say, oh my God, I looked at the rental rates to rent a downhill mountain bike and get the padding and the lift pass, if they have a family, it might be too much of a purchase to make. So it's good to also let them know there's a lot of great dirt roads. There's a beautiful 18-mile road ride. And we have some of the best road biking in the New England. People travel from all over. So you can also let them know there's like other types of bike riding they can do that's fun and, easy, and they might be able to use their own bike if they brought their bike up and they're kind of bummed you're telling them you can't use it at the mountain. And I always tell them again, like, feel free to refer one of the local shops. And if you're not sure, I always tell people too to swing by and we can show you the different bicycles, what they look like. If you want to take one out and rent one for a day, let us know. In addition to that, we do get a lot of people who say like, hey, my kids I'm going to drop them off at the mountain and they're going to go downhill mountain biking. And, I always tell people, if they are experienced, that's okay. But if not, you should definitely drop them off with a lesson. And they will then ask, is there anything, like if they're not bikers at all, is there anything we should do, or we can do that would be fun? And I think this is a new, I don't know if you guys have these, but this is an excellent resource. You have the Sherburne Trails, which are right in town, the mountain bike cross-country trails, but it also has some great hiking options. And if you haven't done these hikes, you should try them. If you're more of a beginner, try the easier ones first, because like Thundering Falls is really beautiful, but if mom and dad drop the kids off at 9 a.m. and they do Thundering Falls, in about 15 minutes, they're gonna be like, oh, that was really nice. What do we do for the rest of the day? Deer Leap, that's a little bit more challenging, and most people will be very happy with that hike. The view is incredible. For some people, that may be too challenging. So then there's some awesome trails down on River Road as well as by the Mission Farm that are great like hiking options. And then there's also lots of other activities. There's the Lazy River for floating down the White, and then there is paddleboarding and kayaking, both at the mountain down at Woodard Reservoir. And a lot of these different activities people are gonna be happy to know about if they're not mountain bikers and they're not interested at all. One last thing I think I wanted to point out was The last question I get a lot is there one map or one guide for all the different cross-country mountain bike trails? And up until this point, there hasn't been one. So you've had to hand out or stock and then have multiple trail maps for each place. But the Mountain Times, and I think Tony, our shop, and a bunch of the restaurants, as well as the Basin, chipped in bought ads in a 60-plus page mountain bike guide for the Rutland region, or greater Rutland County region. And that will be available, I think, in early July or mid-July, and they're going to have 15,000 copies. It's a free resource, but you should just have it because they're not only going to have trail maps of the different cross-country trails, but they're also going to be little tips of after you're done, going to the Green Mountain trails, take a dip in the river, or head over to Tozer's, grab ice cream. Or if you're down, there's going to be little locals tips, kind of where to go, what to do, besides just mountain biking. So I think that'll be a really great resource. And if anyone's business didn't have a chance, it was kind of very quickly put together this year. But next year, I know it costs a lot of money, so the Mountain Times kind of put a lot in on their own. But if you have a chance to support that, I think that's a good resource for people. And they're going to be having not just Mountain Times, but anywhere Vermont sports are distributed, which is up and down the state, which is pretty awesome. Other than that, do you guys have any questions for me? I probably skipped some things that you're curious about. Or Tony. Any questions? Do you guys have anything that we missed that you want us to go over?
No, I think those are great. We did. I was talking to Tony earlier about. I asked him what if he has any fun lingo or slang for mountain biking that he wanted to share with the crowd. So, do you have anything? Any fun mountain biking?
Me or Randy?
What did you share?
If you could share yours with the group, that was funny.
Well, mine was not specifically for mountain biking, but it's
just biking.
chamois butter, right? That you slather in your crotch area to reduce friction. And one of the brands I think is a great brand. It's called D's Nuts. So you get D's Nuts and you slather your crotch area before you ride, particularly in the road. And if you don't think it's a good idea, go for a 50-mile road ride without it. And we can chat about it.
That's awesome.
Randy, any?
Mountain bike slang. We get people of all ages, and I think if you don't know what they're talking about, it's okay to say that you're not sure. Because I think sometimes people try and use slang and it just comes off really bad.
Just lingo or technical terminology. For example, in snowboarding or skiing, you're doing front side, board slides, back side, one of these things of that nature. That's just straightforward. It's not necessarily slang. It just is what a trick is called, or what a particular style of riding might be.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that you would do on the trail. For example, pumping. So, if you think about if you take a watermelon pit and you squeeze it with your fingers, right, it squirts out. So pumping a bicycle does the same thing. So it sort of propels you forward. So you could say pumping, and then we talk about things like lips on jumps, right? So it's you pump it to the face and the lip takes you up and it propels you either out or up, depending on that. There are tricks that you do like whips, you kind of get the bike in the air on a jump and you whip it. And
one I didn't go over, set, was a lot of people will ask about the type of trails and the way they're built, and a very it's not slang, but people will ask, is it flowy or is it techy? Is it old school or is it new school? Old school are generally trails that have been built years ago that are maybe a little bit in Vermont. They can be a little bit more rugged, a little rockier, tighter turn radius. Whereas the new flowy trails, which are, take a lot more time and effort to build, will have berms, which are basically banked turns, corners that you can ride your bike up into. They help you control your speed if you're going into it because you're not falling down the hill. You know, it's built so it's kind of a perfect flowy turn. So people may ask, is it flowy or is it techy? The resort has a lot of flow terrain at Snowshed and Ram's Head, a little bit on the upper mountain, but I would say the upper mountain, if someone's asking, is definitely more technical, bigger rock drops, routes, off camber. And when I say off camber is like if you ski or snowboard, do you know what a like fall line is? If you go down high line, it's a good example where sometimes you feel like gravity's pulling you the wrong way. A lot of times mountain biking, that you can have that same sensation when you're riding on a side hill or off camber. So I always tell people the upper mountains definitely has more of that technical type of terrain, whereas the lower mountain's going to be a little bit more flowy and smoother, kind of buffed out trails and big, nice berms that help you get around the turns more comfortably. And what's pretty cool is the Sherburne Trail Network, while it's only a few miles of terrain right now, it was built with, I mean, beautiful flowy turns. And I think there's a true beginner loop at the very bottom, which I've brought people who've never mountain biked before on, and they had a great time. There's definitely an intermediate on the kind of middle or upper section with not a lot of climbing, so it's a good place for people if they want to start to go up and down. Trail riding is great. And then there are some little rocky sections and rocks that you have to roll over that are going to be more technical. So the Sherburne Trail's kind of, if someone were coming here and they want to go up and down or they're kind of new to it, that's a good place for them to start, where they're going to see all three types of terrain in less than or about an hour or so. They can kind of get a taste for it.
I think what differentiates them is, and Vermont's famous for this, is that the flow trails are machine built, and then the technical trails, we used to call them rake and ride. So essentially, when you're building a trail network, either you hire somebody who is familiar with it, has the skills and the equipment to build them, and they build them so that they're, that they manage erosion, and then they are sort of pumpy and flowy where they have these berm turns and things of that nature. And then the rake and ride stuff is essentially you address erosion issues and things of that nature and technical features, and then you just rake the rest of it out and ride it. So, but anyway, Vermont is more famous for the flow stuff. But anyway, so flow trail versus a rake and ride would be some other terms in terms of mountain biking.
Yeah.
And then, and trail riding, cross-country riding, downhill riding, or they call DH. Those are some of the things. The things you're describing are kind of like tricks. So
Yeah.
I think unless you're like at a really high skill level, most people aren't familiar with that. Unless they're like, they want to be there. It's like, rad, dude, I want to do that. But anyway, can you do whips, man?
So it's like, that's like, I think back to BMX kind of terminology. Like
Yeah, totally different. Great, well, that was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, guys. Thanks to everyone
All right.
who's been here today.
Thank you.